Hello everyone. In this video, I would like to share with you some naming conventions for RESTful APIs, a very basic topic but an extremely important one in the real-world projects that use RESTful API. When APIs are named correctly and consistently, our systems become more consistent, easier to understand, and easier to maintain, especially when you're working in a team. Before going into the details, I would like to quickly talk about the core concepts of REST, which is the resource. REST is resource-oriented. A resource represents an object in the system, such as a student, a course, or a subject. Once you clearly understand what a resource is, naming APIs becomes much more logical and intuitive. The first principle is resources in RESTful APIs must be nouns, not verbs. For example, instead of naming an API as /getStudent, we should name it as /students, like this. The reason is that the action is already defined by the HTTP method, so the URL itself should only represent the result. The next principle is about plural and singular forms. We use plural nouns for resource collection and single resource for a specific resource. For example, /students is used to get the list of students. /students/id is used to get information about a specific student. This approach makes API clearer and more consistent. In RESTful APIs, as I mentioned earlier, actions are represented by HTTP methods. The HTTP method determines what action will be performed. Because of this, just looking at the HTTP methods together with the endpoint, we can immediately understand what the API is used for. For example, here is a list of methods and the endpoint name for student management applications. You see, with get method and the endpoint as /students, we can understand it as this endpoint will help us to get a list of students. For the get method and the endpoint name as /students/id, we will get the detail of a student. For the post method and the endpoint name as /students, this endpoint will help us to create a new student. For the put method and the endpoint name is /students/id, this endpoint will help us to update a student. Same like for other method and endpoints. Another best practice is to always use lowercase letters, and if an endpoint name contains multiple words, we should use hyphen. We should avoid using camel case like this or snake case like this. With lowercase letter and using lowercase letter with hyphens makes URLs more readable and align with the RESTful API conventions. When resources have relationships with each other, we should represent this relationship with using a hierarchical structure in the URL. For example, to get a list of students, to get the list of subjects of a student, we can use /student /id /subjects. Or to get the information about a subject of a student, we can name like /students /id /subjects /subject id. This helps the API accurately reflect with the basic domain of the application. For features such as filtering, sorting, pagination, searching, we should use query parameters instead of putting this kind of logic into the parameter. To summarize, these are basic but very important principles when designing RESTful APIs. If you follow these conventions, your API will be cleaner, easier to use, and much easier to maintain. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe my channel for more video about Java technology. Goodbye.